G'day, welcome to the Victory Channel. My name is Matt Fradd. This channel exists to help people find victory over pornography and the wounds that it inflicts. If you are not yet a subscriber, please help us out by subscribing and clicking the bell button. Today, I want to listen to a 3-minute audio clip from Jordan Peterson talking about the problem of pornography. I'm going to let that play the whole way through, and then at the end, I'll offer some commentary. I think one of the reasons people appreciate Peterson is that he has a different way of putting things. And so he arrives at the same conclusion, perhaps, but in a different way. And so the advice that you're about to hear is probably unlike advice that you've heard elsewhere. I disagree with Peterson on one thing that he says, and at the end I will share why. But I think this is really important, so listen up. And then one final thing, consider not only subscribing to this channel, but sharing these videos. You can go back and check out our back catalog. The reason I say consider sharing them is that people feel really ashamed when they look at pornography, and it's not easy to ask for help. The nice thing about this channel is it's anonymous, just like pornography is anonymous. And so it can help people without them having to ask someone right away how to find help from porn, or how to help them find freedom from porn. So yeah, please consider doing that, and who knows? I mean, you might share it on Facebook or Twitter or wherever else, and never know how it helps someone. So cheers. All right, here is the clip from Peterson. As I say, I'm going to play it the whole way through, and then at the end, I'll come back and offer some feedback.
So I think it's reasonable to assume that there's a novelty edge in pornography, like there is in so many quasi-addictive phenomenon. And so it has to become, because novelty is a sexual kick, it has to stay novel, and that means that over time it's going to become more extreme. So that's not good. Well, so how do you resensitize yourself in some sense? Well, you stop. You stop. And then hopefully you recover. And then you deprive yourself of that outlet, let's say. And you might say, well, you know, is that absolutely necessary? And maybe there's nothing wrong with pornography. It's like, well, I don't know, man. Like, have you ever really met a guy who is proud of that? Like, you know what I mean? That makes him feel like, I'm the guy, man. You know, I'm watching pornography and getting off. It's like, what a man. I don't believe anyone feels that. And to me, maybe I'm wrong. And to me, that's an indication that, yeah, we know. No, it's pretty cheap. It's cheap. It's easy. And, you know, I say that knowing that I believe the research evidence shows that if you introduce pornography into a community, that rates of sexual crime committed by men upon women actually decline. So there is perhaps some utility in the outlet. But, you know, that's a unidimensional analysis and doesn't take into account all the other effects of pornography. Yeah. So, including the ones you described, and I think that those are real. It makes sense that they're real, you know, because it's super satiation, and it's a non-trivial technological problem. You know, it's now possible for young men to look at more beautiful nude women in one day than any man has ever seen, you know, prior to 10 years ago, 20 years ago, than any man in history had ever seen. That's not nothing. That's something. And to think that doesn't do anything to you, it's like, no, that likely does something to you. So don't substitute the false for the real. And don't underestimate the utility of deprivation. You know, what do we need to drive us forward to have the adventure of our life? You know, well, some deprivation, that's for sure. That heightens desire and drive. And maybe you need that. You're afraid to approach a woman. Well, you remove part of your drive with pornography. And so now you don't have that sexual urge to overcome that anxiety. And so you stay timid for your entire life. You know, maybe not, but maybe.
All right, so I thought that was pretty good advice. I want to kind of discuss some of the things he talked about in order. He talked about desensitization and the novelty of pornography. He talked about the shame associated with pornography and how that's not, in his estimation, a result of kind of Christian morality necessarily being imposed. He talked about when you introduce pornography into a community that rape rates decline. I'm going to take issue with that. But yeah, let's just look at that. So the first thing he talked about was novelty. And I think this is a really great point. When people begin looking at pornography, like when I began looking at pornography, I was looking at lingerie catalogs, and then that didn't cut it anymore, and I had to look at Playboy, and then that didn't cut it anymore, and then maybe I was looking at Penthouse or Hustler, and it always escalates, you know. And so people will sometimes say to me, what I was viewing a year ago wouldn't even excite me today, and what I'm viewing today would have maybe scared me a year ago. Why is this the case? Well, Norman Doidge wrote in his best-selling book, The Brain That Changes Itself, the following. He said, "The current porn epidemic gives a graphic demonstration that sexual tastes can be acquired. Pornography delivered by high-speed internet connections satisfies every one of the prerequisites for neuroplastic change." Right? This is important because if someone's been viewing pornography for a while, they might believe that what their sexual tastes are coming to be is what they quote unquote were all along. You know, like, this is my true self. This is what I'm truly attracted to, and pornography is helping me find that. That's not what's happening. What's happening is, due to the neuroplastic change, you are coming to find things attractive that you wouldn't have naturally, and if you get rid of the pornography, your sexual tastes over time may go back to normal. When pornographers boast, Norman Doidge continues, that they are pushing the envelope by introducing new, harder themes, what they don't say is that they must, because their customers are building up a tolerance for that content. The back page of men's risque magazines and internet porn sites are filled with ads for Viagra-type drugs, medicine developed for older men with erectile problems related to aging and blocked blood vessels in the penis. Today, young men who surf porn are tremendously fearful of impotence, or erectile dysfunction, as it is euphemistically called. This misleading term implies that these men have a problem in their penises, but the problem is in their heads, in their sexual brain maps. The penis works fine when they use pornography. It rarely occurs to them that there may be a relationship between the pornography they consume and their impotence, right? So this is a really good point. There is a difference, there is a distinction between impotency and, maybe we could call it, porn-induced impotency or sexual erectile dysfunction. With erectile dysfunction, in say an older man, the problem is below the belt. But with porn-induced impotency, the problem isn't below the belt, it's between the ears. So that is certainly the case regarding novelty and desensitization. Now, what about shame? I really appreciated what he said here, is that I just don't believe that anyone views pornography and then feels like, hey, I'm the man. And I've discussed this before. These gigantic neon signs that say adults club, you know, or gentlemen's club, or something like that, adult bookstore. Why do they feel the need to scream, this is for adults and this is for gentlemen? Isn't it the case that the behavior that goes on inside those establishments is actually shameful? And so in order to combat that shame, we have to pretend that this is something that really manly people do. I've been to many airports, and in those airports I've been into many shops that sell pornographic magazines. Not once have I ever seen somebody perusing those magazines or buying those magazines. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, but I am saying that I think the reason I don't see men or women viewing those pornographies out in the open is that deep down they do know that this is a shameful behavior. And so while they might be willing to look at it on their phone or in private, they're not willing to purchase it, usually, in public. Roger Scruton has this to say about pornography and shame, and I think it's just so brilliant. When I first came across this, I'm like, yes, that is it. So listen up. He said this: "Much of modern sex education is designed as a therapy for guilt and shame, a way of getting young people to accept their sexual urges and to find ways to express them without feeling bad about doing so. What makes people feel bad, it is suggested, is the judgmental attitude prevalent in the surrounding culture, which young people interiorize so that they accuse themselves in the very moment of sexual release. Moral progress means freeing ourselves from this internal judgment, learning to express our sexuality freely and to overcome the irrational guilt that stems from others. and not from our true inner selves. Now, he says, I agree with the view that we must aim to find ways to express our sexual desires without feeling guilt and shame. Now, here's the line. Listen. But I also think that guilt and shame are often justified, and that what they demand of us is not therapy in order to remove them, but right conduct in order that they should have no cause to occur. So shame and guilt are very unpleasant feelings. But what he's saying is there's a reason for those feelings. And what is needed to eradicate those feelings is not to pretend that masturbating to pornography or fornicating or something like this is really a good thing and that you're a really brave person, a sort of, like a revolutionary, a social revolutionary of sorts who's trying to overthrow the... No, none of that is true. What's true is that pornography is shameful, and what you're doing is something you ought to feel guilty for. So if you don't want to feel guilt and you don't want to feel shame, don't try to pretend that what you're doing is good. Instead, don't do those things. Like if every morning I woke up and hit myself in the head with a brick, and then I said, I really want to stop these terrible feelings of just blunt force trauma, getting these headaches every morning, I'm not sure what to do with it. Someone might say, maybe you should stop hitting yourself with a brick. And that would be a really, really good piece of advice. Now let's talk about what he had to say about rape. Okay. So what he said, if I remember correctly, is when pornography is introduced into a community, that rates of sexual violence from men towards women decline. Now, I want to make it clear that I'm open to this being true. It's just that it's not. All right, so why do I say I'm open to this being true? Because in order to demonize pornography, we don't have to pretend that there are no positive benefits to pornography. Hear me out here. There are at least perceived positive benefits to everything that we do. If there were not perceived positive benefits to everything that we do, we wouldn't do any of those things. You ask somebody, why do you look at pornography? And they say, well, it helps me to relax. Well, are we to say, no, it doesn't? Well, even if that were the case, it wouldn't follow that looking at pornography is good. Maybe if I scream at my children, I feel a sense of relief, but that doesn't mean I should scream at my children. So just because an action has perceived positive benefits, it doesn't follow, even if there were objectively positive benefits, it doesn't follow that thing is in any way justifiable if the thing is intrinsically disordered as pornography is. So as I say, I'm open to the evidence. I'm open to someone saying, well, if you give pornography to someone, there's less sexual violence. But what I'm saying is, even if that were true, it wouldn't make pornography okay. But it's not true at all. Not true. For example, and I'll put a link to this in the description, if you go to yourbrainonporn.com, what you will find is, I think it's 112 studies that link porn use to sexual offending, sexual aggression, and sexual coercion. So there is that, and again, I'll link to that below. But I think the argument is something like this. Someone will say, people want a sexual release, and if they can't find it through a loving relationship or pornography, then they'll find it through violence. So if you give people a sexual outlet, the violence will go away. And I think what's wrong with this argument is that it assumes that pornography satiates someone's sexual desires or even desires for sexual violence. I don't think that's true. I don't think that it satiates it. I think that it agitates it. It might satiate it for a few seconds where you feel sexual relief. But I think what it does is it agitates that desire, as we mentioned earlier. I mean, the reason you're not satisfied with the same kind of pornography perhaps you've been looking at, that you were looking at 10 years ago, is because you want to keep pushing the envelope. Okay. And anyway, the idea that, well, it's okay to watch pornography because that will give people an outlet. Here's the thing, a woman isn't an outlet. And if a man learns, if a man doesn't learn self-mastery before marriage, he will never actually, at least I think it's fair to say that often he will not be making love to his wife in marriage if he hasn't learned self-mastery. Rather, he'll simply be using her body as an outlet for what he thinks of as his sexual needs. And her heart will know the difference. Okay, but it's not true that more porn means less rape. And here's just kind of one way to sum it up. Now, I have a whole chapter on this in my book, The Porn Myth, if you're interested in getting it. But I think here's what we should agree to. In order for a man to sexually assault a woman, some part of him must first believe that this woman isn't a person to be loved, but an object to be used. And pornography, it seems to me, is the most efficient means of instilling that belief. Okay. Now, Peterson also talked about choosing reality over fantasy. I love that. Choose what is real over what is fake. Now, why do we choose what is fake over what is real? Well, I think it's obvious. It's because what is real often costs us something, right? We don't like exerting energy. We don't like having to sacrifice. But ask anybody who has been in love for at least 5 minutes, is sacrifice a part of your relationship? And if they understand you correctly and they're not drunk or high, they will say, of course it requires sacrifice. But see, what pornography promises is all the sexual pleasure without the sacrifice, right? Without the laying down of your life for the other. This cannot work. It is a fantasy. It bloody well doesn't work. Just look at your own history of pornography use. How has that been the case or not been the case for you? And we can think about the reason we choose what's fake over what's real, right? Imagine a man who, due to his intemperance, prefers drinking alcohol to excess than dealing with his wounds or dealing with life's problems, right? It's easy to take a sort of drug to quell that emotional pain than to do the real work of dealing with it. Or imagine a woman, due to her vanity, choosing to get cosmetic surgery instead of facing the reality of her aging body, right? She's wrong to choose that over what's real. She's wrong to choose what is real over fake. She's entering into the illusion of a fantasy world. And when you're in a fantasy world and you're not dealing with reality, life may seem better superficially and for a short period of time, but fake things don't work. That's why we call them fake. Saint Dominic had this to say: a man who governs his passions is master of the world. We must either rule them or be ruled by them. It is better to be the hammer than the anvil. And this gets to Peterson's point about denying ourselves certain things and how this is what is required of us, just naturally speaking, if we're to live a more fruitful life. If I don't deny myself a ton of alcohol and a ton of TV at the end of the night, what will be denied me is a good night's sleep, So that's what I have to think. I would love to get your opinion below. Let me know, what did Peterson say that you agreed with? What did he say that maybe you never heard before? What did he say that you thought could be said better? We love hearing from you. Thank you so much. God bless, and be sure, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Thanks.